In a powerful show of support for nature, nearly every government in the world united behind the CBD's sweeping biodiversity plan for life on Earth. They committed to halting the extinction of threatened animal, plant, and fungi species. And in an historic first, they also committed to helping those species recover, so that the life we share our planet with can not only survive, but thrive. Making these goals a reality will take all of us working together. Reverse the Red is supporting governments, conservation experts, and communities around the world as they join forces to activate tried and tested tools and tie global efforts to local expertise. All in a coordinated effort to assess, plan, and act for wildlife. Together, we can save species from extinction. Together, we can secure our planet's future. Together, we can reverse the red.
Welcome, everyone. We are so excited that you're joining us today for this Extinct in the Wild session with our partners here from the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership. Reverse the Red is really excited to put together these few series of webinars leading up to the World Conservation Congress happening in a couple weeks in October in Abu Dhabi. And we will have a full pavilion there. And we hope that if you are making your way to Abu Dhabi, you will stop by our booth and see us and participate in some of those other conversations that we're having there. So without further ado, I'd love to turn it over to Fiona in the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership to share and invite all of your questions and discussions.
Thank you so very much, Megan. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's able to hear me and see the screen wherever they are in the world. So please, thank you very much for joining us today. We are so delighted to be here today talking about the newly formed IUCN SSC Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership and give a little taster of some of what we will be talking about at World Conservation Congress. We'll talk for about half an hour today. We've got a couple of videos and a couple of interactive things to do, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers and discussion and encourage everyone to please use the Q&A functionality for that when we get to that point. I am joined today by Axel and Cara, who are both part of the steering group of the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership, and they will both present on different parts as well today. So they'll introduce themselves a little bit more as we get going as well. So thank you so much. We're really excited to be talking to you about these species which are completely lost from nature, and these species where there is an opportunity for change and there is an opportunity to make a real difference. At ZSL personally, we have done a Reverse the Red species pledge, and many of our Extinct in the Wild species do fit into that pledge. So please also think about that as we're going through today. So to begin, without any further ado, I'll pass on to Axel, who's going to start out by talking to us a little bit more about these species and the Action Partnership.
Thank you so much, Fiona. It's absolutely wonderful for all of you to join us, and we're so excited to have you because we're so passionate about this topic. The topic basically to take on a crisis, a crisis that's facing species that are, I think, often forgotten, to be honest, which is quite amazing. And maybe part of the reason for that is because they don't even exist in the wild anymore. But because of that, especially, it's very important that we take on this challenge. Just by point of introduction, as Fiona already sort of mentioned, a further introduction, I'm Axel Moenschlager with Panthera. I'm the director for the Small Cat Program and for Conservation Translocations of Any Cats. But with IUCN, I'm the chair of the IUCN SSC Conservation Translocation Specialist Group, also on the steering committee of SSC itself. And but I'm so happy that you've joined us to talk about this incredible opportunity and need, really. So as we go on to, you just go forward there, Fiona. Yeah, thank you. Right. So as I was saying, it's actually, when you think about it as a category and as a group of species, it's obvious perhaps that it's the most threatened group of species globally. Now, because they live on the brink of extinction in our hands, more or less. They only exist in ex situ populations. And so this is, of course, very relevant to zoos, aquariums, and botanic gardens, as well as some other holders of different kinds of plant and animal species. But these populations are vulnerable to total extinction, and there are 81 recognized extinct and wild species in the Red List right now, 35 species of animals and 46 species of plants. But that number will be growing, unfortunately, quite substantially very soon, because we have information already, especially on the plant side, of all kinds of species which will be represented in the Red List very soon. All right, next. Thank you. So under the Global Biodiversity Framework, and in terms of the global commitment towards the preservation of biodiversity, in terms of human-induced extinctions of known and threatened species, the goal is to halt this by 2050, and actually to have the extinction rate and risk of all species reduced tenfold. That's a huge and ambitious target. And not only in terms of the organisms themselves, but in terms of the genetic makeup, the genetic diversity within those populations of wild and domesticated species is maintained, safeguarding their adaptive potential. Of course, when we think about that in terms of this situation, we're talking about the genetics of wild populations, but also of ex situ populations, and then how we co-manage that sort of genetic diversity, exchange, adaptability, and suitability for return to the wild. Next. So we have this, very diverse group of species. The one thing that they all have in common is how incredibly close to extinction they are. But taxonomically, they can be very different, as we look at all of these extinct and wild species, for instance, that depend on us in terms of being saved, if you will, from extinction again. So we started to put a spotlight on this a few years ago, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But if you want to read a comprehensive view of it, and the best reference is probably one in 2023 in Science, where we have extinct in the wild highlighted and the precarious state of Earth's most threatened group of species. One of the things that you'll see through that and through subsequent slides here is that there are equally possible fates. And it depends on zoos, botanic gardens, holders of these kinds of organisms. The two fates are very simple. They could persist or they could go extinct. And history has told us, as we will see, that that can happen in, equal probability. Next. So not only are we taxonomically diverse in terms of the challenge, but also geographically diverse. This is just for animals themselves. So this is a global challenge, a globally shared challenge that we must globally, in terms of IUCN and our partners, take on. And even more so for plants, again. And of course, we can look at different kinds of situations, different reasons, in different ecosystems, different scenarios as to why they are in the state that they are, but also in terms of trying to figure out how we resolve these issues. So, in terms of that taxonomy, in terms of the geographic diversity, you can see that really it is a global challenge, but one that we felt, having looked at it for some time, again, was sort of slipping through the cracks, was often not even thought of, which is quite amazing. Part of the reason for that might be, for instance, that technically extinct in the wild doesn't even fall into the threatened species categories, because those go from vulnerable to critically endangered, and this sits sort of above it. So sometimes I think it's actually almost forgotten, even though clearly as a group, as a category, it is the most threatened group of species. Next. Yeah, so at our second Global Conservation Translocation conference in Chicago in 2018, we actually formed an Extinct in the Wild task force within the Conservation Translocation Specialist Group, made up of these partners, to try and, first of all, try to understand and try to make a plan, and then drive towards action that would make a difference increasingly for these species. We then brought that to Congress in Marseille. In terms of a motion that you could read more about from last World Conservation Congress, which is still very active. And that was on improving both the process and action to identify and recover extinct and wild species. And in terms of both houses, the government house and non-government organization house, you see, between 95% to 99% support of this motion. This motion wasn't just about individual species in these different settings, but actually about how we move from understanding those populations ex situ or in situ towards policy and action. And this is from that 2023 paper, is that as you look to the top right, you see something called wild again in green, and the bottom right, you see a gray bar saying extinct. And so this is backcasting to 1950. You see there are different kinds of animal species, some of which actually went to wild again, even to near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. But other ones dropping down to extinct. And then for plants as well, some moved up and some were lost. So this is quite interesting, because I think we often think about ex situ populations as a safety net, which of course they are, but it doesn't mean it's good enough. They can still die in our hands. And so we need to not be complacent about the fact that we might have some species in holding, that we might educate the public about those species that are with us, but actually be determined to do whatever we can to save them from extinction, global extinction, and to get them out again. And here's a graphic from that paper. I know it looks complicated. Don't worry about all the names. If you just look at the animal side and the plant side, on the bottom, it has a time series that goes back. And in green, what you see is the time that different species were in the wild. And then in blue, you have the period where they're actually in ex situ populations. So the good news is at least that, we still have them. In yellow is actually if any of them have ever been released, which doesn't mean that it's sustainable yet, but at least it's been attempted for different periods of time. If it turns white with an X, it means actually they went extinct. And so we see that on the animal side, there, for instance, you see occurrences of extinction. You do see this trajectory. And in some cases, you see very long efforts to maintain these species. On the plant side, you'll see a striking difference in the sense that there are many that have been just in blue, and that actually never go out the door again. And so there are more occurrences of them simply being in human hands, but not getting back into the wild. Nevertheless, not talking about this in a negative way, it means there's a tremendous potential to make a difference. So looking at this more closely, putting a lens on it in two different ways, for instance, for animals and plants here, just want to address or get a little bit deeper about this impression that we might have that the species are safeguarded. If we look at plants, for instance, from within this paper, we see a number of plant species across the x-axis in the bottom left. And then you have how many institutions are actually holding them. And you see that for some, like on the far right, okay, wonderful, we might have upwards of 100 institutions. But on the bottom left, it becomes almost invisible because those 5 or 6 species are actually only in one institution in the world. If something happens in that institution, or the organization, just chooses not to deal with the species anymore, then they're gone because they're not in the wild normally. And so that's a tremendous challenge. We also have the situation with plants so that there are seed banks, which is useful. However, in some cases, we don't know if those seeds can be woken up, if you will, to be a good source. In many cases they can, but it isn't necessarily true. If we look at the animal side, again, different species across the bottom, we might feel quite safe because, well, we have them. I mean, we might even have them in different kinds of institutions. But actually, when you get to the bottom left, you see there are some that are down to such low numbers. Now, everybody could debate what a sufficient number is in terms of having something be viable, however you qualify that, or suitable for release. And people will argue about that, especially when we think about the difficult issue of, do you take from these organizations to put back into the wild again, which means you are potentially diminishing the viability of the captive population to get them out again into the wild. So we've put a spotlight on this in a number of different ways. Here's another paper, I think 2020, from Science, where we said, it's extinct in the wild species' last stand. This was particularly under COVID, where actually, because different institutions weren't having visitation, their finances were collapsing and such, we were very scared that they would back off from extinct in the wild species. In many cases, extinct in the wild species are not your top candidate, for instance, for a zoo, for visitation. It isn't a lion or a rhino or whatever. So often it requires financial commitment based on conservation grounds from those organizations and their partners and supporters. And here we have this wonderful situation with the Guam kingfisher, or seaheck. This is one of 2 species of birds that did not go extinct on Guam, although 10 other endemic species of birds did when an invasive brown tree snake came in. And so this species has been under human holding for about 40 years, only in American zoos. And again, we might feel that that's good. Those populations are around, 120, 130, 140. We're trying to make sure that those spaces are increasing. But actually, in looking at it, as has been done in this paper of ours, is we find that there's inbreeding depression. We often talk about it, but here we can find it. I mean, it's affecting the survival or the reproduction of individuals. So oftentimes, let's say, time is ticking. We can't just sit on these populations. We can't be complacent, feel good about that they're not gone. We need to think about how to get them back into the wild. So one of the things is finding suitable ecosystems to return to, is from a follow-up paper. And here are, for instance, a number of candidate species where we do see ecosystems potentially is good enough. In fact, in terms of scimitar horned oryx, which was extinct in the wild, it's now happily downlisted, which based on its reintroduction to Chad. So it is possible in different cases to bring them back. It's often not easy. And so we need to, of course, address situations in the wild, address threats to be able to return these species again responsibly. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying we must do something, because the alternative is extinction. Having them in ex situ populations is wonderful because we have an opportunity, but it's not good enough.
Thank you very much, Axel. So I'm just going to share a couple of examples and case studies of different species, plants and animals that are at different stages along their recovery journeys. And you'll see throughout the next couple of slides when I'm talking, we have lots and lots of partners involved in all of this work. And I think this is really important to recognize. None of this work is being conducted by single institutions. Everything requires partnerships with governments, partnerships with zoos, partnerships with other conservation NGOs and in-country partners. And we really bring on board all of our partners that are part of this work. But I'll just briefly talk about the Hawaiian mint. because this is a very interesting species, and we like to bring a plant example to everybody here. Hawaii is home to over 1,400 natural vascular plant species, and 90% of those plants are not found elsewhere in the world. So there is really unique biodiversity and really, really unique plant biodiversity. And over 300 plant species in Hawaii are listed as endangered or at least threatened. So they are facing a degree of threat status on the red list. And over 100 species are either extinct or found in fewer plants in the wild, fewer than 50 plants in the wild. So really, this just highlights how critically important this work is. And you can see here, these plants are in a laboratory under human care, being looked after, they're critically endangered, and they're being maintained and propagated and released back into safe wild habitat in protected areas. But this is part of the Hawaii Rare Plant Program. It's quite intensive, and a huge amount of work is going into making sure these plants are able to be put back into the wild. Moving on to fish. So this is talking about 3 of our Mexican pupfish species. And these species were all driven to extinction in Mexico due to the streams where they lived in the Nuevo Leon region being drying up due to agricultural intensification. And so these fish completely lost their habitat. And through good fortune, a number of individuals were in ex situ care in zoos and aquariums prior to their extinction in the wild. And they have survived since this time, and since then they were declared extinct in the wild, and they have been bred in these institutions. Now, one of these species is only found in 3 institutions. So back to Axel's point earlier, they are extremely vulnerable to total extinction because they are really being held by such a small number of organizations who are very, very dedicated and diligently working towards these species. Now, there is hope, and there is an excellent conservation action plan now written for these 3 species. And the IUCN Freshwater Fish Specialist Group has been hugely part of this, as well as all of the organizations you can see here on the screen. And there is a great plan towards moving these fish eggs and fish back to partner institutions in Mexico as the first step towards their journey home. So capacity sharing and building expertise in Mexico so that these fish are at least in country. And then as safe wild habitat is identified, they are able to be put back into the wild. So there's a lot of hope for pupfish, but there is still a very, very long way to go. And then a little bit more on the sea heck, as Axel was talking about them earlier. On Saturday just gone, we celebrated 1 year since 9 sea heck were released into safe wild habitat in Palmyra Atoll. Now, sea heck are from Guam, but it is not possible for them to go back to Guam because of the presence of the brown tree snake. But it was identified that there was an ecologically similar island, Palmyra Atoll, where these birds were able to go to. These birds have been bred by a number of very dedicated American zoos, AZA zoos, for the last 40 years. And they're really getting to a point where they needed to have more space for the birds to go to, and we needed to start a route towards them being able to return to the wild. So 9 birds a year ago went to Palmyra. I am very pleased to say that all 9 are still doing very well. They're on the island. They have formed pairs, they have begun nest building, they have laid some eggs. The eggs are not fertile, but that's completely in line with expectation because these are very, very young birds. But it's really exciting that they are flying free for the first time in 40 years. And through this assisted colonization, able to be safe for the moment. A number of zoos contributed hugely towards the hand rearing effort for these 9 birds so that they were able to be hand reared in a biosecure facility at Sedgwick County Zoo. And a huge number of people put a lot of work into making sure that these 9 birds or 9 chicks were able to go back to Palmyra. And this program continues, and numbers continue hopefully to grow in the coming years. And if anyone hasn't had a chance to have a look, there is an Instagram page which has fantastic and fabulous content of these really beautiful birds. They are so striking. You can see in this picture here, the male and female difference. They are absolutely beautiful. All of them have Chamorro names. And there is a real lovely way to follow their story on Instagram. So please do, if you would like to, have a look at their videos and their updates that they are regularly posting. And I will also just talk very briefly about the success story of scimitar horned oryx and how amazingly exciting it is that these animals have been downlisted on the IUCN Red List to endangered. Over 600 animals have been born in the wild, and the founding animals came from European zoos. They went to the breeding center in Abu Dhabi, they formed the breeding herds, and then the next generation from that went to Chad, where they were then released into a reserve. And it's really, really fantastically exciting that they have been able to reach this point. It's been a huge undertaking of work over 30 years, 3-4 decades. And a huge thanks to all of the partners involved, specifically the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, who have made this possible. I will share now a short video which just talks from the perspective of some of our keepers at ZSL, as well as some of our field biologists who are working on the species. And this year we celebrated Scimitar Horned Oryx Day in August. So I hope that everybody was able to participate in some way in that content. If you're not able to see or hear the video, please immediately type in the chat.
Even just a few years ago, these beautiful animals were some of the last of their species. They were completely extinct in the wild. Today, thanks to the work of conservation zoos like us and organisations around the world, they're now roaming their native deserts of Chad again.
I'm Luke and I work on the deer and antelope section of Whipsnade Zoo. We're out here today with our herd of scimitar horned oryx. An older herd now, so a lot of them have bred and contributed to the reclassification by the IUCN Red List from extinct in the wild to endangered, which is a massive, massive conservation success.
The scimitar horned oryx were declared extinct in the wild in the early 2000s after things like habitat loss and hunting pressure.
Everybody in Chad said no, the oryx have all gone to Niger, and everybody in Niger said no, the oryx have all gone to Chad. We were convinced by then that there were really none left in the wild.
ZSL have played an important part in the reintroduction and conservation efforts. There's currently colleagues who work for ZSL out there now, playing a massive role in the release of that species.
I first got involved with the ZSL scimitar horned oryx in 1985. When I was a kid, there were T-cards in those days. Brooke Bond had a T-card series, Mammals of Africa, and on the cover was a picture of some oryx drinking at a waterhole. It looked very interesting and rather splendid, so I've been interested in them ever since. These oryx, they're one of 5 sorts of oryx, and this is the one that's found right across the southern Sahara. It's an incredibly suitable animal for the extreme environment it lives in, especially with global warming. It can live out there without any natural drinking water at all for months and months on end.
Unlike a lot of other antelope species, because of their confidence,
They are really engaging.
And they're a stunning animal to look at.
a brilliant white colour with their orange neck and their really impressive scimitar-shaped horns.
They're full of character. It's nice having a big herd of them as well.
And then obviously the story behind them is immense and shows what zoos are about.
So how did these oryx finish up getting reintroduced? Well, ZSL has always been involved and supporting the efforts of the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, who have been leading reintroducing the oryx into Chad. Animals from Whipsnade went to Abu Dhabi and are in the founder group of animals that have been assembled. The offspring from some of the Whipsnade-born animals are now released in the wild in Chad.
A couple of other keepers and myself will be sent out to Chad. We'll be supporting the teams out there.
To put tracking collars and to check the health before releasing them back into the wild.
Until we have several populations of oryx back in the wild, there will always be a need to have a reserve population.
It's a beautiful story, effort and success that shows just how organisations across the world can work together to bring species back.
Thank you very much. So I am now going to hand over to Clara, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the how and the exciting work of the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you all for joining us today. For a quick introduction, my name is Kara Martell. I'm a member of the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership Steering Committee, and I'm the Manager of Conservation, Breeding, and Reintroduction at Rewild. Fiona, thank you so much for sharing that video. It's such a wonderful video. It's such powerful work that can be done in recovery. And it's so exciting to see species moving from extinct in the wild, from having no wild specimens in existence to seeing a thriving population in its landscape. It takes such expertise, such momentum, time, partnership, preparation, and knowing that so many more species need that kind of help. And as mentioned by both Fiona and Axel earlier, with our goal to improve process and action to identify and recover extinct in the wild species. For all these reasons, we have come together to initiate this alliance, the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership, and to encourage you to join us. It's a huge opportunity, and it truly is in our hands. Extinct in the wild species are all under human care. And with this newly formed action partnership, our goal, we will strive to let no extinct in the wild species slip into extinction. As mentioned earlier, and to reiterate, really, we need to ensure that by 2050, extinct in the wild species have not slipped through our hands. You can pause there, Fiona. Being lost forever, that we're working to reverse the extinction curve, that line is drawn in the sand, and it's starting with these species, the extinct in the wild species. It's such a huge responsibility, but it is a huge opportunity as well. And on the previous slide, Fiona, if you head back just one, with the steering group of the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership being alliance of these partners that you see listed here, the Zoological Society of London, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, Rewild, and the IUCN SSC, CTSG, lots of letters, the Conservation Translocation Specialist Group, we still require your expertise. We recognize that we cannot achieve this alone. The saving of species cannot be done alone. These partners each bring significant resources to drive the recovery of extinct in the wild species. And yet we also need you. We're adding partners at every level to this action partnership, and everyone is welcome. Zoos, donors, technical partners, people with various points of expertise, IUCN specialist groups, all are welcome, and we encourage you all to join. Next slide. So when we need to start looking at what needs to happen with this action partnership, really where we can make an impact, what key points do we need to be focusing on, where can our support truly drive recovery efforts forward, we've identified the 4 R's: rescue, revitalize, release, and reinforce for both process and action points. And the 4 R's really lay out what needs to happen. For rescue, to create the first XC2 populations. Some species are data deficient, and other species have not yet been officially identified as extinct in the wild. So we need to work together here at this point to identify what species need rescue for a hope of recovery. Moving on to revitalize. To revitalize the demographic and genetic viability of XC2 populations. Many species populations are very small, and some are very vulnerable. So how can we work to support genetic diversity? Because if holding facilities for extinct in the wild species fail at this point, at any point really, then we have all failed and species will go extinct. So we must work together to revitalize these species and support recovery. At the release stage, to release species restricted to XC2 care into the wild. And really, additionally, generating media and further support, sharing these stories and the methods of success, enhancing the potential for increased support, both within our own scientific community and further out for further funding. As we move on to reinforce the conservation status of translocated populations. And this includes post-release monitoring, hopeful downlisting, responsible management. And if you look at all of these 4 R's all the way through, we want to ensure that we're being evidence-based, using science to inform all of our choices and to make responsible decisions as citizens, and really as custodians of the planet. Next slide. Now, this slide shows a bit of a chart indicating how to achieve these 4 R's. The Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership is a partnership of global organizations who use and contribute to this initiative. Many zoos and botanic gardens are already working with these species, with extinct in the wild species, but often, as Axel mentioned earlier, it's just a few zoos that are responsible for the continued existence and potential of these species. So by coming together and providing a platform to increase collaboration, we stand a much stronger chance of revitalizing and hopefully ultimately downlisting these species. Now, looking at this chart, we will achieve our goals by, one, building capacity with things like elements around the circle, with fundraising, with driving action, with strategic thinking, all ways to build capacity. By generating knowledge through monitoring the status and tracking progress. We want to ensure species planning and prioritization, and creating a dynamic network of forces involved, and motivating government, zoos, botanic gardens, universities, aquaria, other conservation NGOs to catalyze and drive action for extinct in the wild species, which is the center of our work, and working closely with relevant IUCN specialist groups for needed expertise all along the way. Next slide. Alongside those efforts, we have these ambitious 10-year targets, and we hope that with SSC, we can work together within the IUCN family to really realize those 4R targets. And within the rescue target, our target is to create the first XC2 populations of 20 highly threatened species that are very likely to need such support from zoos and aquaria and other XC2 holding facilities to avoid extinction. For the revitalized target, we want to improve the demographic and genetic variability of XC2 populations and increase the population size of 30 species by 30%. The release target. This target focuses on translocating 10 species currently restricted to XC2 care and move them into a wild context. And all of that with the intention of establishing a free living wild population. And then the reinforced target. We really want to improve the conservation status of incipient translocated populations for 20 species, where the releases have already occurred and hopefully leading to the eventual downlisting on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. So with these targets and with our joint effort comes a new hope. The zoos and aquaria of yesterday, and this is just 50 years ago, have evolved into the conservation centers that we now know today, where rescue and revitalization can happen and can save species. We're seeing success stories right now in publications in the media. How can we build on these successes and build on this evolution and develop bold new strategies and further network and identify opportunities, and most importantly, overcome some of those challenges, both the new challenges and ongoing challenges, to be able to meet our targets and make that difference over time. Next slide. How can we best build our work for a stronger future? Where do we want to be by 2050? And this was brought up earlier in the presentation as well. As we work toward 2050 goals and we strive to let no extinct in the wild species flip to extinction on our watch, and we lead by example, and we work to inspire, and we work to help others to turn innovative plans into action. We specifically want healthy, viable populations of extinct in the wild species, transitioning to thriving wild populations. And at the same time, we want extinctions to be prevented by rescue into XC2 care and to reverse the extinction crisis. Really, our collective achievements will highlight the massive potential for responsible species recovery that can yield very high hope for both nature and humanity. Next slide. So this is the point in our presentation where we're asking for a little bit of participation and feedback, because you will make the difference. And if you have never used Mentimeter before, It is a very simple process. There are 2 different ways you can join Mentimeter. You can take your phone and scan the QR code on the screen, or you can go to menti.com and enter in the join code. And that join code will be at the top of the next few slides if we move on too quickly for you to get the QR scan in. We just have a few questions for you today, and then we'll move into discussion points. So we're very excited to get started. Please let us know if you have questions. You can drop those in the chat. Okay, Fiona, you can move on. The first question, will you be attending the World Conservation Congress in Abu Dhabi? We are really looking forward to seeing many of you there. It's exciting to see that some of you will be there. The Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership will be presenting in a few different time slots and a few different locations while there. We'll have a thematic session, lightning session. We'll be in a panel discussion in the Reverse the Red Pavilion. Please review that schedule. If you happen to be heading over to Abu Dhabi, we'd love to have you join in further conversation at the World Conservation Congress. Question 2. Okay, so this one is an open-ended question. What are challenges you currently face with recovery of extinct in the wild species? And you can place as much as you want to in that open-ended box on your screen. Depending on your organization or your various teams you may be working with, perhaps this might be something like holding space or funding or genetic diversity, maybe how to prioritize depending on how many projects you have going at one time. But as we work to focus on process and action, we'll be reviewing all of these open-ended comments and really working to find commonalities and needs. So we really appreciate all of your input here. Looks like we have a lot of funding concerns for sure, time, staffing, different types of support from different organizations, including government as well. We look forward to looking through all of these, and we can probably elaborate on more of this in our discussion time as well. Question 3, how could the Extinct in the Wild partnership help you? After this presentation and in now knowing a little bit more about the Action Partnership and our focus about the 4 R's, the examples of species work, how can the Extinct in the Wild partnership help you or your team or your facility, or maybe what can the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership work to address or to identify that you're really hoping to see? Maybe some of that is networks or species priorities, funding. I see some direction, what current work is going on across the globe for various species. Again, these are open-ended comments, and they will definitely help us identify focus points and evolve our work for you and for extinct in the wild species. So it's really exciting, and I'm excited to run through all of these with our steering committee post-presentation and as we work up to the World Conservation Congress in Abu Dhabi. So we would now like to open up discussion. For reference, these are the members of the steering committee within the ZSL, BGCI, IUCN, SSC, CTSG, all the letters, and Rewild. We encourage you to reach out if you have specific questions or suggestions or would like to learn more. I really want to thank you for joining today, and I'll turn it back over now to Fiona for directing our conversations forward.
Thank you so very much, Cara. That's really fantastic. And I hope everybody enjoyed that quick tour through with examples and a bit more of an understanding of the work of the Action Partnership. I will now open the Q&A, and I've had some questions come in, so that's really fantastic. I will start with the first question. How are extinct in the wild species identified? How long should they have been confirmed absent in the wild? Rewild have listed lost species, many of which, despite not being seen in the wild for decades already, are yet to be considered extinct in the wild. So shall we hand that question? Axel, would you be able to give us some insights on that from a Red List perspective?
It's a fantastic question. And one of the things that I think is often found for species, even as one thinks about them potentially being extinct, is that folks will say, when I say folks, is different organizations might say, well, you needn't worry about it because they're still out there. So that's very tricky, is knowing, when something can be classified as extinct in the wild. Under the IUCN Red List criteria, there have been methods developed now. I think they're based on monitoring, translated into sort of occupancy analyses to get a good understanding of has there actually been sufficient sampling to see if they are still in the wild or not. And if such sampling does exist, and it's highly likely that they're not out there anymore, or that they're really functionally extinct, then that they are classified as extinct in the wild. So the simple answer is in the revised guidelines of the IUCN Red List, there is direction on this, and I know that the team, the Red List team, has worked really hard in addressing this question, and also has been working hard towards the answer of how we consider recovery from extinct wild species.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Axel. And I think, whilst we are talking and have been talking about those species which are categorized formally on the Red List as extinct in the wild, we very much want the Action Partnership to also reach out and offer support to those species which we know are cascading into total extinction or potentially into extinct in the wild. So they're species which are often perhaps critically endangered, and for a variety of different reasons are following that cascade of decline, and they will either just slip into total extinction without coming into ex situ care at all, or maybe an ex situ care may or may not be doing as well as they might be doing, and so may also slip into total extinction. So whilst we are focusing from a kind of red listing perspective on that category, we do want the Action Partnership to be supporting on that wider level to those species that are also in that perilous need, and really identifying how we can use the resources here to support those species. Simon, I just saw your question in the chat, so thank you, and I think I answered it in my answer, so that's really great. I guess one of the things we're working on at the moment is really how we identify those species, and working with some members on the task force who are conducting some research on this, but kind of really keen to think about how we can really identify those species that are cascading into needing rescue care into ex situ, or needing that kind of revitalization and that support. So kind of that's very much an active space at the moment that we're working on, and how we do that. So back to the Q&A, we have another question from Lex, who is representing a conservation NGO in Colombia, where manages 27 private reserves. We're trying to develop conservation strategies for multiple endangered species that we protect. We would love to interact and do our part in Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership. How can we best reach out and discuss some cases of opportunities? So thank you for your question, and please reach out. I see you're based in Colombia, so really well positioned in terms of the upcoming WILDA conference and CPSG. Cara and myself will be at both of those, so perhaps we could find an opportunity to connect in person at one or the other. But if not, and if the geography and the times don't work out, please reach out directly. We'd really be keen to talk a bit more about your work and how we potentially could support. So please do reach out. Any further questions that are coming through? Okay, another question. Thank you. Oh, they're all coming through. Thank you. Christian from CPSG. Do you have numbers on, or a rough idea of how many, or the portion of extinct in the wild species that have some kind of plan guiding their next steps and action? That's a really great question. Can I hand that question to you, Cara?
Sure. So it depends really on what organizations are starting to tackle that. And if you look at just AZA alone, they have different programs. Some are safe programs, and some are just zoos and aquaria working to see how they can support overall recovery efforts. So there's quite a range of what work is currently being done. Some is very well thought out, has included conservation planning, as some is just getting started, which is where we need to identify and work to really figure out what teams, what species need the most support, what are well on their way, what species need funding, and what species have yet really to be identified for any kind of conservation planning. So within those 81 extinct in the wild currently identified species, we have quite a bit of work to do in front of us, and we've only started to tackle a few. So we definitely are going to be working alongside the CPSG and you, because we are going to need support as we work to identify which species are most in need of that conservation planning support.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And really, just to add to that point, as we build the partnership, we have a structure identified with the steering group and then with species champions, and really where work is already ongoing. I call on the example here of Partula, where there's already a very well-established network of organizations who are working together for these 10 extinct in the wild species. The Action Partnership is there to support and to help, and there's already a very well-established species champion and really established framework in which this is working. So this is very much about how it can support and embellish the work that's already ongoing. We've had another question on the chat through from Yash. Can we give the contact details for who to get in touch with for WCC? Yes, absolutely. Please reach out to me. We have a flyer. We just got our final session confirmed today, so I have a flyer with all the dates and times. But our main session will be the thematic session, which is on the Saturday of WCC in the afternoon. And that will be the main session at which there will be a good opportunity for discussion and sharing of the work of the Action Partnership. The other sessions, we have a lightning talk, and we have a session in the Reverse the Red Pavilion that's part of a panel discussion, and we have a speed talk. So the other sessions are much smaller and more clipped. So please do come to the thematic session if you're able on Saturday of WCC. But please, if you'd like to reach out, I'd be very happy to share the flyer with you as soon as that's ready. Another question, what are your thoughts for including genetically distinct extinct in the wild subspecies into this program? Axel, could we hand that question to you, please?
Very good one. Thank you so much for that. Just a couple thoughts before I get to it. One of the things that we didn't mention, but is reflected in our previous papers, I think since 1950, something around 70 species or so, or 70% of species that have gone extinct from the planet never had ex situ populations at all. So they didn't have a safety net, they just slipped away. Again, part of that reality. Another aspect, again, before just coming to this, is Fiona mentioned species champions. So we have this concept that perhaps individuals could, or individual organizations or a consortium of organizations could be the champions to help in the leadership of the return of some of these species. Now, in terms of subspecies, that's also very interesting because, of course, within the IUCN Red List, there are the species designations, and then in different cases, there are the subspecies designations in terms of the threat level. So I think we'd be very open to this. And of course, we'd need to learn about exactly, what the genetics or genomics are that underlie those splits and classifications. But absolutely, we'd be very open to it, be willing to learn, I think, more about it. In what cases is that relevant, and in what cases is that an opportunity to be able to help on a subspecies level. We have been concentrating, I think, primarily on the species level, but just like in the IUCN Red List and the broader ambitions, that IUCN has with all its partners worldwide, we'd be very interested, and please do reach out to us. We'd like to explore that more with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Axel. Moving on to another question. This is a really brilliant question. There are more historical examples of successes and failures that we could learn from. Could we build a database of those to help with future projects? I think there's a huge amount of learning from the past that's still available and open to us to be done. And Axel, you've your hand up, so please go further on the response here.
And just a small shout out to the fact that we're in Conservation Translocation Specialist Group, we're just about to bring out the 8th book of global conservation translocation perspectives, made possible by many around the world, but spearheaded by Pritpal Saray. So there's going to be nearly 500 case studies now of different kinds of species, plants, animals, marine to terrestrial, and so on. And so please have a look at those. You can download the previous 7 books on the CTSG website. There's also, of course, many meta-analyses that have looked at what people might call success and how they might define success, and what kinds of lessons have been learned from either success or failure on conservation translocations in general. Of course, within that, you would have scenarios to extinct and wild species specifically, but that's just part of that larger continuum.
Fantastic. Thank you, Axel. And within the science paper that we mentioned earlier, it does also give some really good, very specific examples. But I think your point that there's more to be done in this space and a real opportunity for the Action Partnership to be connecting people together and to be learning from the current work and from past successes and failures. There's a huge learning opportunity there. So we are drawing to a close for time. I'll just like to thank all of our speakers, Cara and Axel, and thank Megan for hosting us and inviting us to come and share this presentation with you and share this webinar with you in advance of World Conservation Congress. I really hope that people are able to connect with us either at WCC, at WILSA, at CPSG, or at any other opportunity. Please feel welcome to reach out. We'd be really keen to speak further as the Action Partnership gets going. We're really excited about this work and the opportunity that it enables for species recovery and for direct species conservation. I'll invite Cara and Axel to have any closing thoughts from today and anything that they would like to just have as a quick 1-minute closing message. Cara.
Of course. We really don't want to reinvent the wheel, and all of your comments are so valuable going forward. We want to take all of our past successes. We want to take all of our past failures. We want to really look at extinct in the wild species and make the decision that they are not going to go extinct, that we are going to do something to save this very threatened group of species. Now, what can be done? We have to improve process if we want to improve our action. And that's where your help, your support, your information, we want this to be an open door. Your feedback comes into play. So I really want to thank you for your participation and encourage you to reach out.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cara. And to echo that, thanks for participation. I think it's really great, even in this very short Mentimeter, for us to see some of your thoughts. And I guess one hope that I have is that we can become a more dynamic and resourceful opportunity to enable people to reach some of those funds that they are so desperately needing to conduct some of this work. And I think that really rang through in the Mentimeter really excitingly. Axel.
Yes, thank you. Just overall, just sort of want to reflect on, we've been trying our best in terms of putting a spotlight in terms of understanding the science. These situations are not easy, of course, otherwise these species would still be in the wild. So we were very conscientious and very deliberate in making this an Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership. The key word, as it is in the logo, highlighted as action. And so one of the things about taking action in any of the 4 phases that Cara outlined, for instance, is it can sometimes be scary because you're like, well, we don't know everything. We don't, how do we know this and how do we know that? And so that we need to embrace that uncertainty and face it and say, okay, what is it that we really need to know? What are the uncertainties? What are the risks and benefits for individual institutions, for different stakeholders? But how do we actually get to a point of taking action? Because if we don't take action, the alternative is crystal clear. I mean, these species are going to go extinct. And so we need to find ways of working together to reassure each other on the science, to be able to find the funds and be able to propel those funds and escalate that momentum to empower institutions, empower people around the world to be in a position, because we very much think and recognize the need for resources, and be able to position for leadership within organizations. And in the Mentimeter came up, for instance, with executive support and such, to take this on and to give credit and shine credit on those organizations that have the courage, the willingness to really make a difference. We're in it together in many different ways, and different partnerships can be very specific to different situations, but we must take this on. We can take it on. And really, I think there's not any more powerful example that conservation works than to save a species that is clearly on the very brink of extinction. If we can show it here, we can show that all kinds of other conservation actions across all the other levels of threat are possible to be addressed, and that we can make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Axel. Thank you, Cara. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Hope to see you all at an event in the not too distant future.